Hi everybody, I am Buthayna Rabab'a. I am a principal team member in Biorisk Management at Princess Haya Biotechnology Center in Jordan University of Science and Technology. I had a master's degree in applied biology, human genetics. I had an extensive training program from Sandia National Laboratory in United States. Today, we will talk about dual-use research of concern. The main resource of this lecture is the National Science Advisory Board of Biosecurity. Our aim from this lecture, as a researcher, you must be responsible to have option for identifying dual-use research of concern, to know the 7 categories of experiment that are included in the double use of research of concern, to know there is another example not limited to these 7 experiments, to feel confident while doing risk assessment and mitigation in case as a researcher that you have double of concern, to hold yourself personally accountable for your research and identify potential dual-use research of concern in your research and institution. Now, we will take about briefly a historical background when the intention and interest of dual-use research of concern have been started. By the end of World War I, there is a pandemic influenza with high level of morbidity and mortality. The problem that within 2005, a group of research, they have been published a paper generating influenza virus that are identical to the extant one that had been eradicated by the end of 1918. So they use the reverse genetic technique to produce this similarly virulent virus to the eradicated one. The aim of this study at that time just to help and aid in vaccination development, while the research could be misused and put sort of dilemma. There is a source of dual-use research of concern if they will be misused to pose a threat for the public health. Now, we will start with knowing the historical background of dual-use research of concern, identifying the dual-use research of concern as a term, researcher responsibility, a framework in case if you have a dual-use research of concern, how to assess. And by the end of this lecture, you will have a case with the question for discussion and reflection beside a quiz. Okay. First, we will start with a historical background. In 2001, after September attack, there was an attack of bioterrorism with Bacillus anthrax spore have been mailed to senator. So it's just the beginning of bioterrorism. And in 2001, 2002, many research have been done with a source of dual-use research of dilemma. They have misuse of mouse pox. They produce different misapplication of information and misuse and technology to produce information that affect our environment, our public health and safety. But in 2004, the National Research Council has report with Fink report the recommendation to scientists to be educated about their responsibility toward and regard to dual-use research. And by the end of 2005, a National Science Advisory Board of Biosecurity is established to provide advice, guidance regarding biosecurity, oversight the dual-use research of dilemma. Okay. Let's start with defining dual use research of concern. Regarding to the National Science Advisory Board of Biosecurity, dual use research of concern is research that, based on current understanding, can be reasonably anticipated to provide knowledge, product, or technology that could be directly misapplied to pose a threat toward public health and safety, agricultural growth, and other plant, animal, environment, or material. So you will find it's intentionally misapplied for this information. Then the National Science Advisory of Biosecurity have been categorized 7 categories of research might qualify as dual use of research of concern. So during designing this type of research, security must, during this design, conduct and perhaps the publication while doing this type of research. Let's start with the first point, first category. Enhance the harmful consequences of a biological agent or toxins, like the previous exam when they have regenerated a seasonal flu from eradicated pandemic influenza by the end of 1980. 2. Disrupt immunity or the effectiveness of an immunization without clinical or agricultural justification, like producing of some cytokines into viral genome to render their antiviral immune response. The third one is confer the biological agent toxins resistance or clinically to or culturally useful prophylactic just to facilitate their ability to evade detection methodology. Sometimes they have play with a plant pathological agent like arowena, and they increase their ability to be resistant to streptomycin. The fourth one is increase the stability, transmissibility, and the ability to disseminate the biological agent or toxins, increasing in the case of effectiveness by which agent may be transmitted. 5. Alter the host range of tropism of a biological agent or toxins, like converting non-zoonotic virus or biological agent to zoonotic one. Like the most famous example of this, how they just release information related to H1N5. The sixth one, enhance the susceptibility of the host population, like when they have a recombinant bacillus. This recombinant bacillus have the information just to affect the tumor necrosis factor alpha, which directly facilitate the evasion of normal host deafness. The seventh and the last one, generate a novel pathogenic agent or toxins or reconstitute it from an eradicated or extant biological agent, like the example that we have discussed about the pandemic influenza that have been eradicated in 1918, and they have regenerated an identical one by the end of 2005. Research responsibilities. We have mentioned at the beginning of this lecture about Fink report and their recommendation regarding their responsibility toward a dual-use research of concern. Although the responsibility conduct of dual-use research require active, thoughtful engagement funding organization, but our changing agent is the researcher themselves. After all, they know their research and the best way how to communicate knowledge, the product, the technology that might be generated, and how they know the degree of immediately of the threat. Okay, this is the framework how we can deal, and this is the researcher responsibility. They must be being cognized for the concept of dual use, being knowledgeable, keeping their institution informed regarding the potential dual use research of concern, doing assessment, mitigation, ensuring that laboratory staff, student aware how to deal and trained with dual use research of concern issue, and how to communicate with dual use. A framework for risk assessment and management. This is the main 5 key questions if you will depend on the Think recommendation report. First question, could this research yield information that could be intentionally, here we are focusing on intentionally, misused to threaten public health or agricultural or national security? The second question, what is the nature of a threat that could be posed intentionally? And based on the above question, consider if there is how likely this anticipated of this information will affect and threat our public health. And the fourth question, could this research yield useful information and benefit to our life? And the last question of the Think report, do this potential risk outweigh the potential of benefit? It's sort of balance to manage if there is the risk, manage the same benefit. For each question, we have another dependent question that we must have an idea about how to deal in each case. Like, what is the nature of information? Is it novel or not? The depending of the potential nature, economic, agricultural, or public health. So, and in case, based on the proceeding of the information, the researcher will have 2 choices. If there is a discernible potential threat, how to deal as a researcher, and if not, how to stop or proceed with the analysis. And for the fourth question, if there is a benefit from this information, what the potential of this nature of benefit and how much benefit might there be? And the fifth question, if not, for the potential of the risk of outweigh regarding a potential benefit, if not determine the applicable risk management, looking for suitable risk mitigation process. And finally, communication, dual use research of concern. How we can communicate as a researcher. It will depend on 3 points: content, time, extent of the distribution. So for the content, it will depend. Communicate sometimes as it is, or sometimes with additional appropriate context of information, and sometimes with a modified version of this information by decoupling the material with concern at the same time. Timing, sometimes to communicate immediately, or sometimes wait until you will take the acceptance for the communication, no longer to pose them at the same degree of risk. For the extent of distribution, sometimes you must determine if to limit the distribution or not. Who is the person must know or need to know the basis for the categories of individual who should have access, and do not publish or make certain accessible to be published, sort of mitigation and risk assessment. By the end of this seminar, this is an example to the case with such a question for discussion and reflection. This is and how to deal with some code of conduct. We will talk about this code of conduct as a detail in bioethics seminar, and it's easily you can reach it on the National Science Advisory Board of Biosecurity. It has been explained in detail, so about the conduct toolkit and availability. And you know that bioethics is the suitable and the most successful solution to be the researcher to be educated, well educated with bioethics in case of dual use research of concern. And we will talk about bioethics in detail in next seminar. This case that we will discuss. What you should do as a researcher if you are in face of double use research of concern regarding to think report and recommendation. This is a such case. It's a simple case about a postdoctoral fellowship, how she had communicate with their colleague in her institute. She had a benefit of her research, and at the same time she has a dilemma that her research at the same time have sound of dual use research of concern, how she can deal with this situation. By the end of this seminar, I expect that you will participate in the case of report, and could you please answer the quizzes that you will have in our website. Thanks a lot.